Hello there. What is going on, everybody? Today we are talking about spaceships, spaceship design for the games that you love. And I have a special treat for you because we are joined by two fantastic guests today. And if you like what you see here, don't forget to subscribe, click the links, and all that other good stuff that are going to be down in the video description. But without further ado, we have Michael Gernes and Max Brooke. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today.
Yeah.
How are you both doing?
I'm doing pretty good, I think, personally. I mean, it's, yeah, I think it's
been a while
the
since
world
I've
out
had...
there. I know is not the easiest for everybody, but
yeah, that's a heavy question right now.
Yeah.
Maybe I should
So I
start
think
with
in
something
my life,
different.
I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Max? You doing?
Yeah, personally, I'm well. Yeah, things have been good lately. I've got a couple exciting projects I can talk about, a couple exciting projects I can't talk about.
Exciting projects that you can't talk about are always like the juiciest.
The best ones.
Yeah,
yes.
they absolutely are. So for people who aren't familiar with you, I know that each of you have worked on fantasy flight games, spaceship-based games. Michael, I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background and maybe anything new that you're working on, or what or everything that you have worked on, or whatever you feel like sharing today.
Yeah. I worked for FFG for just shy of 9 years. I spent a lot of those years doing Star Wars Armada, and I also got to do X-Wing, and not just like the wave, it's the stuff that's coming out right now, but I got to do a little bit of X-Wing like right around the start of the line.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I know that you are definitely largely responsible for the recent wave, and including some things that we all know are coming that haven't officially been announced yet. I'm sure they're and for you guys watching at home, like there may be some no comment stuff. There's obviously certain things that I can't try to pry out of these guys. I can't be like, tell us what was coming next for Armada. Tell us about the clone Z95. I mean, if it's not been officially announced yet, these guys are still professionals, so you're not going to get, and trust me, I don't want you guys watching at home thinking, why aren't you asking them the juicy details? I'm like, oh, trust me, I would love to, but at the same time, if I asked a whole bunch of questions and all the things were, sorry, I can't talk about that, sorry, I can't talk about that, it'd make for a really boring video. So I'm kind of, there may be a few little prying questions, but most of it is going to be stuff that these gentlemen can answer. So thank you, Michael. But yeah, I didn't mean to cut you short there, but yeah. So like the latest wave, and that includes the Razor Crest, if I'm not mistaken.
No, that was Max. Although we collaborated on a lot of those things together.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, we did that one a little earlier. So it was coming out at the same time, but we organized things internally to do that design for that a little earlier because we knew we wanted to get that out as quickly as possible.
Excellent. And Max, a little bit about your background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I was at FFG for almost the exact same period of time Michael was. I think I started like 6 months earlier or something, maybe not even that, maybe like 3 months earlier. And I started out working on the role-playing games, worked on Warhammer 40K role-playing. Actually, speaking of spaceship stuff, my first assignments were on Rogue Trader.
Oh, wow. That's going way back, yeah.
Yeah, really big spaceships.
Yeah.
So the Rogue Trader RPG, and then from there I worked on Star Wars role-playing. And then when Alex and Frank were really, really, really deep in X-Wing, they'd been working on X-Wing since, I think, Wave 4 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, like they really needed, they wanted to be able to take breaks and do other projects.
Right.
And so I was rotated in to help them out. And I jumped into the deep end of X-Wing, helped them out with that, and then was on through second edition reboot, through these last couple products that are coming out now. So X-Wing was my bread and butter for quite some time, and then I was also working on role-playing games during that time. I designed the FFG Legend of the Five Rings RPG, so
okay.
Lots of different spheres I was involved in. Not all of them, but many of them involving spaceships.
Very cool. And so I know we were talking a little bit. We talked a little bit beforehand, but I know that there's some other projects that are coming out, some other games and some collaborations and stuff. basically, I want to be able to plug what you guys are working on. So what new stuff can we expect?
Absolutely. So one thing we got to collaborate on that was a lot of fun was Ashes of Power, the free RPG Day adventure for Genesis RPG from Edge.
Mm-hmm.
We got to work with our old friend and coworker Sam Gregor Stewart on that.
Now,
and
Sam was actually on the cover of the Twilight, or he's the
he's the base for the human.
Yep.
Yes, the Federation of Soul character.
Yeah,
very very cool.
And so that was a ton of fun because we got to jump into a different sci-fi universe and do a bunch of really neat stuff on that. We got to design the Hylar graduate student who in the tank, and the who else did we have? We had the
Undersecretary Chelix.
Yes,
he's my favorite. So
yeah, the Zicha diplomat, and all those
cool.
fun RPG characters, and then Embers of the Imperium. You got to work on that, right, Mike?
Yeah, I actually I wrote a significant part of a chapter, and I also did a little bit of collaboration on the IP.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm very excited for that to come out too, because I would say I have a history with Twilight Imperium. It was one of my favorite board games, especially when it was new.
And it's kind of what drew you to Fantasy Flight in the first place, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I bought first edition Twilight Imperium, and I played a ton of that when I was like, much younger. And I played every edition. The only one I haven't played deeply is fourth.
Oh, it's good. It's really good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So people who've been following me for a while, you've probably heard me talk about or review or talk about Twilight Imperium. But TI4 is the first one that I actually bought and said, all right, I'm tired of playing other people's. I'm going to have my own now. and so I got that one and the expansion. I absolutely love it. It's a game that I love to play, although I've played it so few times because especially throughout the pandemic, trying to get 5 to 6 or even up to 8 people now together to play a long game is tricky, and but it's so rewarding when you can. I've never had well, actually I did have one game that ended badly, but I never have a game that I walk away from that I'm like, oh, that was terrible. The one time was somebody got up and left and never came back, but and then and they were in full control of Mechatol Rex, and then what do? And you're like, wait, do we just treat them as like an AI? And I mean, you could, but then the mood was broken.
It depends on the edition, depends on the scenario, right? Like, sometimes that just gives you I played the most of that game in the early days, and I remember I was always like, you control Mechatol Rex, you control all these votes.
Oh yeah.
In the Galactic Assembly. So
it's a powerful. It's like Dune. If you control the spice, you control the world.
Yeah.
Speaking of other sci-fi franchises, we're gonna get into other IPs and stuff like that as well. But I think you also have something else that you're working on, also, Max, right? With
I do
with
indeed.
Luke.
Yeah, so Luke Eddy and I are working on a game called Stone Saga.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you the link for that so you can drop it in.
Absolutely. Check the description below.
Over with Games, and that's going to be going to crowdfunding probably sometime Q3 of this year, roughly.
Okay.
So we're in midstream in development now, and it's great to actually get to work with Luke on a project because we sat next to each other for years and never actually technically collaborated on a project. We helped each other all the time, but we never had a project with both of our names on it. So it's fun to have a formal collaboration finally with Luke Eddy. So that's what's been keeping me really busy lately. And then just some residual stuff on Adventures in Rokugan, the D20 adaptation of L5R.
Okay.
That's forthcoming from Edge, so that's pretty exciting too.
Very nice. And I think that's a kind of a good segue into one of my first. It's a partial observation, part question, and it goes into like the camaraderie that I see amongst most people who worked on these Star Wars games. A lot of there was a massive change up a while back, and a lot of people kind of went their own separate ways, but I see so many of you that still have friendships and still are working together, and I think it tells a story. It's like a testament to the camaraderie and maybe the work environment. I mean, do you think that's that played a part of it? Do you guys still keep in touch? And
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it helps that, a lot of the Fantasy Flight folks are still in the Twin Cities, so it's easy to keep up in a lot of cases. But
Right.
even, those who aren't, and a lot of people aren't still in the Twin Cities, I'd be friends with all these people even if they weren't my coworkers. I mean, the best thing, and I am friends with these people even now, though many of them are not formally my coworkers. But also, it's an industry where the line between like friend and coworker can be very like fuzzy because especially if you're freelance like I am and like Mike is on a lot of his stuff.
Yeah.
You work with somebody on one project one week and then the next week you're not technically working together, but your project is still a thing and they might have little things for you. So like it's
So we're all
it,
connected, kind of like
yeah,
the
we're
living
all
force.
connected, kind of like the living force. Exactly, it's kind of like the living force.
No.
And people get into this industry because they love this stuff, and so there's just this sort of shared passion that a lot of people have, that I think is pretty evident in the work. But I don't know, it's Mike, you're always telling me about you follow like TV production more than I do, and you're always telling me about how you hear about people in those groups are friends in real life too, and then they'll work together on one project, and then years later on another project, and I don't know, the games industry feels kind of similar.
Yeah, yeah, that's my impression. And but I think we were lucky, and I always tried to stay conscious that we were having a special experience working together. We were getting to do some really the kind of games that I know I wanted to play when I was younger with an IP that I love, and it was also like we got to share the joys and also the stresses, and that kind of bonds you. So like, I mean, Max and I we've known each other 10 years, and we've, I'd say we're really good friends. We play role playing games together all the time, and
Mm.
and it's just we clicked. A lot of other people we met there, kind of became pals.
Hmm.
But everybody that we worked with in the minis department, it definitely felt like like a real circle
Yeah.
of like we're all in this together. We're working on these things, and we got a lot of energy, I think, out of working with each other.
Sure, absolutely. And I think especially, you know, with Fantasy Flight kind of separating from boarding card to Fantasy Flight miniatures, also, which was, I think pretty much exclusively Star Wars related. You had such a really cool opportunity to work on, the Star Wars IP. And so I guess a question I have for both of you is, when you're designing content for Star Wars games, and that's your job, how does that kind of translate to the experience of also being a fan? Like, are you absorbing content differently, or are you given access to stuff early? Like, did you know what the Razor Crest was going to look like before anybody else, and things like that? So, like, how does that really impact your fandom and the way that you watch a show or a comic book or a movie?
Yeah, so the sort of the two-part question there.
It is a little bit,
The boring answer to the second part is we pretty much did not receive things early. Sometimes we'd be able to get access, Lucasfilms, if we needed like a turnaround of a ship or something, they could provide us with like, files to help us like correctly model the proportions. I mean, not us, but the 3D sculpting team
right?
to help them like make the ship correctly. So, sometimes there'd be like things like that, like style documents and stuff like that, but it wasn't, we weren't generally getting anything earlier than anyone else. So we were sitting there as excited as everyone else for the day, like the new episode of The Mandalorian would drop or whatever. Just like, oh, what are we going to find this time?
Right.
And yeah, we'd be watching the backgrounds and watching it with like a bunch of people who all really care about it, and different things was fun too, because it was like, oh, like the Legion people would be like, look at that truck, and then I'd be like, oh, is that a new ship or is it just an old ship at a weird angle?
Exactly.
So yeah, it was a ton of fun, just sort of like assessing it from that perspective. It definitely changed how I engage as a fan, because as just a fan with no direct professional connection, I tend to be much more of a binge watcher, where like I'll kind of wait for something to finish and then watch it all. So I'm not like up on Book of Boba Fett right now, but I'll probably watch it all at some point in the near future.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really care about spoilers too, though, is the thing. So I don't know. Years of watching Star Wars and not caring about spoilers because I wasn't really interested in that part of it, has just made me like not care about spoilers in general.
Well, I think that's one of the things about Star Wars too, is that like it tends to be, especially if you grew up and like, you know, had movies on VHS or whatever, and you know, you watch them multiple times, or DVD. I don't want to date myself too much here, but you know, when you watch them on
You're
repeat,
Whoa, whoa.
yeah. Well, it was definitely VHS for me, but yeah, but yeah.
I was gonna say, I mean, at this point though, there are adults who are gonna be like, DVD is whoa, physical media.
Yeah.
What is that? Yeah. No, I don't even know if I could play any DVDs right now. No, I could probably do it. I think we got an Xbox that could do it. But yeah, it's so strange the way all that. But like having stuff on repeat that you would watch over and over again. Like I think that it's not always about spoilers. Sometimes it's about the journey too. You know, that like just watching it over and over again, and just getting the feel and the music and being caught up in the moment. You know. And I'm curious how that, and this may be more of just a generic observation, but I'm curious how that's going to change, you know, in the age of, you know, this overwhelming spoilers and the internet and stuff. Like if we're going to look back on, you know, The Mandalorian 20 years from now and be like, it was great to just watch from beginning to end all over again. And I'm not sure, because it's so spoiler related, you know, that you want to see each week what it's going to be. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I do think it's interesting. Now, I know on the Armada side of the house, you know, there was, you get some early access for the Starhawk, which I believe Lucasfilm sent over. And now, Michael, I don't know if you had a whole lot of, hand input into that process. But is there anything
that was
on that?
My involvement with the Starhawk was mostly strategic and, you know, producer type input.
Okay.
Brooks drove a lot of that because they were a huge fan of that content. I do have one story I can tell you.
Oh, I would love to hear about it.
Which is not Starhawk related, but the one thing I definitely remember getting an early look at was the profundity. And that was a real joy for me, because it was like, it was before the movie came out, before Rogue One came out. And I got to I was told like, oh, there's gonna be this ship in there, and you know, you get to take a look at it because it, you know, just timing had worked out. And I remember like taking a look at it and I was like, oh, this is really interesting, you know, and this, oh, there'll be a space battle in this, you know, like I didn't know anything else about the movie, but I was like, well, there's this, and I knew it kind of came from that old Ralph McQuarrie concept art. I could tell that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that was really cool.
That's very cool. And it's a great ship to this game. It still does very, very well, and it's a very competitive ship, but it's
one of my favorite of the miniatures in Armada 2. Like, you know, they all look great, but the profundity came out super well.
It really did, especially with that outer kind of sheath, like that extra armored piece around the center. Like the way it's sculpted and put together, it's a delight, and it's also a joy to repaint because it allows you to do, you know, some different techniques with it too. Just a great model. Great model.
Yeah, we had wonderful sculptors, digital sculptors. I mean, Bexley,
very much
who did, I think, the overwhelming share of that line.
X-Wing and Armada.
Yes.
Bexley did an enormous amount of, I was going to say, every mini you hold in your hand, practically, in X-Wing or Armada.
Yeah.
And X-Wing has an interesting, I mean, and I know you guys aren't really like the sculptors, so I don't know how much you can lend to this, but like I know with 2.0 there was such an improved kind of look at the having moving parts, and I can only imagine that had to have been a complete.
I can give you a story about that.
I would love to hear a story.
So
about
we were talking about whether we could do that, and you know, we were talking to, you know, some of the sculptors. I think it was, you know, Bexley, and we said like, and Frank I think said like, oh, we couldn't do moving parts X-Wings, right? And Bexley said, I think we could. And we all went, whoa, that is a huge change, because, you know, like, obviously that would be a game changer if they could do that and have it work. And I was, you know, like, cautiously optimistic, but also part of me was like, how is this going to work? And they brought out the 3D print and showed us, and it was like, well, okay, it seems really good. It seems to hold together well. I'm not breaking the ship apart when I do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really exciting. But yeah, a lot of the times the sculptors would really impress us with their ingenuity, where they'd, you know, we'd say like, oh yeah, you know, like it would be cool if it could do this, and they'd come back and say, well, what if it did this? And whoa, we didn't even think that was possible. So, you know, we'd often lowball, and then they'd come back and say like, oh, we can do that.
Well, I think the biggest one for me was the B-Wing, when the B-Wing came out, and everybody was expecting it would rotate around, but like when all of a sudden wait, the S-foils move too. That makes 3 moving, like there's 3 joints on this ship. How in the world? And they're so tiny too. I was blown away by that.
Yeah,
we
this
I oh
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say we kind of as a department had a special relationship with the sculptors, just because the games we were working on were so component intensive.
Right.
And also like I was in the position of being the producer for Armada, and like I helped produce one of the early waves of X-Wing, and that just involves a lot of interfacing with the people who are doing the sculpting and a lot of thinking about components.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the components is one of the physical aspect to these games. Like, while the rule sets are great, and they always have been, and you can play them with just the cardboard, but it's the physical aspects that gets people looking at the table. It's when you play at your FLGS and people walk by and they're like, what game are you guys playing? Like, that's what X-Wing and Armada and Legion also, like, that's what these miniatures games do, and that a lot of other games just don't do. Like board games, sometimes board games can pull that off, but it's a real challenge for a board game.
Speaking of games where we really got to build relationships with the sculptors,
Yes.
actually, I feel like Rune Wars is sort of an unsung hero of that, because that was the one where our sculptors really kicked up their game and brought a lot of amazing new stuff to the table that then got leveraged in Legion.
I loved Rune Wars, and I wish it would come back. There's a lot of things I loved about Rune Wars. But they were great minis. It was fantasy too, as their own IP, and you're like, and I remember thinking like, and this is a good point because it's going to lead into another question I have, but I didn't want to cut you too short. So
you produced Rune Wars, right, Mike?
Yeah, I produced the game and I developed several waves. I had a little bit of input in some of the IP development we were doing. It was an unexpected joy.
It was really fun, and I feel like if Legion hadn't come out the time it came out, Rune Wars, we'd still be seeing new expansions for Rune Wars today. Especially with your own IP, and you're not restricted. Be like, man, we really need to balance this unit, so we really need like a dragon, but we can't do that because FFG licensing won't let. Wait, hold on a second. We can totally do that. Like
that's a really interesting point, actually, in general. Yeah, that like it is a very different exercise to make a licensed game versus an unlicensed game.
Yes.
Right.
Or like a game where you own the license. Like, working on like L5R RPG, we were kind of redefining the IP at the time. So like a lot of the time, Kat would say, "Oh, the mechanic should work this way. It needs, because that's how it works in the IP." But other times, I'd say, "Hey, could we add a thing to the IP for this mechanic?" And Kat would say, "Oh yeah, definitely." And so, like it's a very different exercise than trying to like correctly simulate an IP.
Sure. And that kind of leads into like my next question. And this one, I'll preface, I didn't clear with you guys beforehand. So if you can't get it too deep into it, that's no problem, because I have a follow-up that I think you would be able to. But dealing with a licensed product, were there times where maybe you wanted to pull a ship from Legends and then like Lucasfilm was just like, no, keep it to the new stuff? Like, was that a challenge that you guys faced?
It worked a little differently than that. So we would put together a list of ships to propose to them. And, there were Legends-ish ships that did end up in X-Wing, for instance. I mean, the Kimogilla doesn't appear in any, modern canonical material, right?
Right.
So, we'd always put together a list of ships.
And the gunboat did eventually show up too, which was really
yes, cool. Yes. I told Frank, we got to break glass. It's time. It's time for a break class in case of emergencies. So for ships like that, basically for anything, we would put together a spec sheet of like possible options, and then we'd run that by the representative at LFL, and they'd give guidance. It was never like, oh, you guys can't do that. It was always more like, oh, we think this would be good, or they're always good to work with. So it wasn't like, I don't know, Mike, did you have a similar experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I got to do a lot of things that I didn't think we were gonna get to, because right around we were doing Armada was when they it was after the Disney buyout. They were adopting the new line about continuity, right. And I had a lot of really fond memories of the Timothy Zahn novels. A lot of those characters were near and dear to me, and we were able to get the Garmbel Iblis into that game.
I know, and that's an early thing about
that's a total EU character.
The early waves of Armada, I feel like they were kind of locked in and approved before the buyout happened. So that's why you have victories. Even though a victory, I believe, is technically canon, you really never see it. and like the assault frigate Mark II, and there are a lot of things that like would have a harder time getting into the first wave of a game if it were made today.
Yeah,
I mean, potentially, but go ahead.
I was just gonna say they were really flexible with a lot of that stuff at a time when those things were in flux.
Very cool. Yeah.
I was going to say, too, part of the reason stuff would have a tougher time getting in is, honestly, just as a developer, I would want to put forth what I think most fans are going to recognize. At the end of the day, what most fans are going to recognize is what's been on a TV screen.
I agree with you 100%, especially with things like Star Wars Rebels that were coming out for a long time. And yeah.
But Rebels loves its EU stuff. They put the Dreadnought in Rebels, didn't they?
They did, although they named it like I think it was an Imperial.
They might have called it
ship,
something else,
but we all knew it was a Dreadnought.
But it was totally the Dreadnought.
Yes, but it wasn't featured like it was more of an Easter egg. But had they done like a 2-part story arc all about that, like they did with the Interdictor, you'd have had a much easier time getting that, I think.
Yeah.
So this kind of paves the way into the second part, which is like licensing and theme versus mechanics. So from a design standpoint, I guess where do you kind of if it's on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is like all theme and 1 is like all mechanics, or or vice versa, like where do you kind of lean when you're trying to design something? You have a ship or a capital ship or a fighter or something like that you're trying to design, and you want it to fit into a wave. Like how do each of those weigh on you?
For me, that totally depends on the game you're making.
Well, let's say for X-Wing and X-Wing and Armada specifically, or
Oh yeah, but it even varies within within those two, because those two games are interested in different things, right? Like for Armada, like fighter squadrons don't have that much granularity, right? Mm-hmm. So there's an element where you're gonna probably make like more choices that tend a little more towards gameplay because they're a little more abstract. And they're not as much the core focus of the game, but for the, you still want them to reflect the theme, but it's, like the theme is a little more abstract there. For X-Wing, like obviously fighters are front and center. So I think a lot of it comes down to, and like the flying of the fighters is very important. So I think it comes down a lot to like, it's not one switch, or it's not one lever set at like 1 or 10 for the whole game. It's more like a bunch of levers at different settings, if that makes sense. Sure. I don't know. What do you think, Mike?
It's funny. I was going to say like I'm probably can put a percentage on it for me. I would say I'm probably about a 60-40 theme to mechanics ratio guy. Okay. I think they're almost equally important, but I tend to skew a bit toward theme.
All right.
Because I've been blessed to work on settings where I really love the theme anyway. But like you gotta have good gameplay, for it to be fun. It's got to fit with the system you're doing, I think.
Well, now both X-Wing and Armada have certain modes that exceed the standard point value. Like, X-Wing has the huge ships and epic play, and then of course Armada has the two bigger superstar destroyers that you can't even fit in a standard game, right? So like, do you think those were maybe more opportunities to say, hey, if you're not playing, you're probably just doing a casual game if you're doing this. So like, and I know that there was a lot of things like the wing tool and a lot of those new things that came out. Do you think that kind of gives you more license to worry a little less about something being broken and overpowered, and a little bit more fun with the theme and kind of creating those thematic scenarios and stuff like that, or those opportunities?
Well, that's an interesting thing where you actually, mechanics itself starts to split, because you have like mechanics as reflection of theme versus mechanics as gameplay versus like mechanics as thing that is fun, which may not necessarily link up with balance in the same way. So like a good example is the wing tools, where like the wing tools, are they a good reflection of theme? Maybe, maybe not. They're fun though. People really enjoy using them. So for the slightly more casual, laid back, epic battles environment, and because you have a lot of ships on the table, and because each ship is less important, because you have more ships in aggregate, they're kind of perfect. But they are very mechanically oriented. Like they're a mechanics thing, but it's what you want that mechanic to do, right? The wing tool is being built as a like way to facilitate the fun of the game and keep the game moving and all that. Whereas, the wing tool wouldn't fit into, again, this goes back to the like what game were we talking about, because epic battles and a standard standard game of X-Wing are different beasts in a lot of ways. And so I try to think about them very differently when I was working on them, because they had different goals and all that, and they were to some extent even pitched to different crowds. Obviously a lot of people play both, but a lot of the people I know who really like Epic are like, oh, I just want to play Epic, and then a lot of people. So
I'm more in the Epic crowd because I haven't been doing as many tournaments, and I haven't played an X-Wing tournament in years, and so I've drifted away from the X-Wing. I started out heavily into tournaments, and then once Epic came out and we started doing scenarios, I'm like, I really like the bigger, fun play. More so than the competitive scene, and but then again, a lot of people, and I feel like I'm in the minority. I think it maybe 60-40, where more players lean more into leagues and tournaments, and less players are like eager to play those overpowered, great, crazy scenarios.
I don't know. I think that's a really interesting question, and I don't have good market research to back this up, but I think by the numbers, probably most people are just kitchen table players who are just sort of enjoying the game and doing their own thing, right?
You're right. It is hard to really measure that, because I only see the people who are vocal enough to join the channel, leave a comment, or come out to the store and talk to me there, or join my Discord. And when we have a pretty big Discord and it's growing, but at the same time, how many people buy the game at home, play it, and never really go any farther than that.
And not, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's great as a game designer. If people buy the game and play it and just enjoy it, I'm happy.
Absolutely. And that's actually, so that's an interesting thing that can kind of lead us into something with, I want to talk about editions a little bit, and there's some different things to different aspects to talk about with this, because I feel like with X-Wing and Armada, they each kind of approached new editions in different ways. And with since there is a new edition, although I guess it's just it feels like X-Wing 3.0 has just been announced, but they're calling it 2.5 right now. I don't know if you guys have really seen what AMG has put out. I don't know, but I feel like this is an opportunity, without really trying to talk too much about what AMG is doing. I feel it's an opportunity to talk about how to handle new editions and some of your experiences with those. And so I think, Max, you said you came on with before 2.0 happened. And
yes,
I know, Michael, you worked on the early X-Wing as well.
Yeah.
So like, at what point do you think like, hey, a game needs a new edition? And then as a two-parter also, because like, what really constitutes a new edition? Like what, because to frame this question, like, X-Wing moved to 2.0. Some people loved it. Initially, there was definitely some backlash. I know I've seen a lot of people, they do that for any big change, because, you play a game for a long time, change is bad, right? But sometimes change is really good also. But then Armada just did like the 1.5. So like, really, at what point do you think it needs to be a whole new edition, versus at one point can you kind of get away with just saying this is just a new rules reference guide kind of?
Yeah, well, and X-Wing had that 1.5. That was the Force Awakens core set. It wasn't called X-Wing 1.5 or anything, but that was that was where the new rules reference was introduced.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the sort of core ideas of the game were reconsidered, but the old content wasn't refreshed yet. So yeah, I mean, pretty much any game with ongoing content faces this problem, right? Like you have content accretion, things are building up. If you don't have a way to refresh things somehow, you're eventually going to get a lot of stuff in your game and not a lot of ways to deal with it, and it'll become hard to make new stuff for it. So I don't know. I don't think there's like a specific right amount of time for that. Like, it totally depends on the game. I think we really built X-Wing 2.0 to run as long as it needed to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it did fine at that, because it had the ability to change points values comfortably. It had the ability to change slots and all that. So it had tools for adapting if need be. But on the other hand, there definitely was card buildup of like, oh yeah, supernatural reflexes is real good, and it is blocking out other cards, and we can point cost it to 1 million, but that's kind of in a kind of an inelegant solution. So,
Yeah.
eventually there does come a time where you want to have a turnover again. So, certainly X-Wing 2.0 was a lot less cramped than 1.0, but no game goes forever without some kind of changeover or refresh of some sort, whether that comes in the form of all the content cycling out,
Yeah.
or a big rules change, or both, or some combination of elements of both. So yeah, it's an inevitability in the life cycle of games, and it's an opportunity. It's a great opportunity to really like explore some new things. So I don't know. New editions are always interesting for me. I play 40K casually and not well, and every new edition is exciting, right? Because it's like, oh man, did my Space Wolves get better? Did they get worse?
Right. I can definitely see that.
And oftentimes my evaluation of a new edition as a player, when I'm just letting myself be very selfish and subjective, it's just like my evaluation of the edition is like, did my army get better or not? So
I think that's a really a hot take on stuff, is like, did your faction, and I think X-Wing's in a position having 7 factions now where that feels like, that's really something to look at, and like, is this a net win or a net loss for me? Whereas Armada's, not maybe not in the same position. I feel like we've got the two really flushed out factions right now, and then we have just the 2 that were so close to getting where they needed to be, and that have kind of been put on pause for right now.
Well, Mike, I'm really curious, actually, because I was pretty much not paying attention at this point, but like, what were some of the thought processes behind the refresh on Armada?
Well, I think that was where the game was at the time, and we knew we were going to do Clone Wars, and that presented a great opportunity to to draw a line and do some new stuff. Mm-hmm. And like Max was saying, you keep doing waves of stuff, and over time, you start to kind of use up some of your design space.
Sure.
And you start to it's like a tree that needs a pruning every once in a while. Stuff starts to clash with itself just because you're doing stuff. You're needing to feed the tyranny of the cereal, as one of our friends used to say. And so in that case, it was like a lot of the stuff that we did was I was trying to introduce some new levers, and also we in the midst of doing a lot of play testing, and I was really blessed with that game to have like a super great core of play testers who were very active community members. Mm-hmm. So I got a lot of feedback from them about some of their pain points and what we could do to change things just a bit, because I think that was a wonderful game design by James and Christian, and and it worked great for years. But yeah, it comes a day when you oh, okay, we have to do a few things to maybe tweak this.
Sure. Yeah.
And a lot of it's kind of like right place, right time. Mm-hmm. Like what are the needs at that moment?
Right. I think a lot of the community's feedback for both new editions were like, yes, this needed to be changed. This needed to be changed. Some people think some things went too far. I know removal of the passing cards for Armada. Some people weren't crazy about that, but it made sense. And you replaced it with something else that was similar. And then X-Wing, I'm gonna actually complain a little bit, and I hate the removal of point values on the cards. And I'll tell you why. Because I am in the content creation business. So when a spoiler comes out, here's the new X-Wing, and I'm like, I can't really tell you how many you could fit in a list, so I can't really speculate too much on how good or bad this is going to be until all the points hit. So you made my job a little harder.
That's a really interesting challenge, actually. And yeah, I mean, I think it really threw I think 2.0 really threw the content creation scene at the time for a loop, because yeah, new content gets spoiled, and people are very used to the paradigm of Magic and 40K and what have you, where it's like you can see how good something is going to be because the points are printed there. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. When we invent digital paper where I can make the numbers dynamically update when I want them to on everybody's copy of the card, I will be very excited, and then I'll put points on cards.
I think that actually is coming. I've seen a lot of people do apps for like iPads and stuff that just make it look like your list is right there, and that's great. Except we're talking about the game that can be, especially if you're playing a larger game, it could be an hour or 2 hours. My iPad's gonna get really hot in that time frame.
I think like digital list building is really interesting too. I mean, if I was just designing a new minis game right now, I would definitely think about like how is the list building going to work? How is the digital list building going to work? Like, is there a way to integrate that? If like, etc. So it's a really interesting question overall, and it's again something that is like totally specific to the minis game you're working on. Like X-Wing, as we were making it at the time, was meant to be like very tightly balanced, and we needed the ability to make these dynamic updates to it because of its particular needs and the way sort of the dogfight played out. Legion though just had points on cards and then would have occasional updates to those, and that seemed to work great for Legion. Kind of the best of both worlds, right? People got to have points on cards.
I was going to say, like, for me that works because I get to see the preview and I'm like, all right, here's how that's going to be. But you also know that because there's digital list building, that point might change, and at least it works for the kitchen table because, like, with 2.0, you didn't have the kitchen table players covered.
Well, that's what quick builds are for.
And that's where I was going to. So you had to include that, and I think that's a great way to do things because now, even with the 2.5 or the 3.0 or what the AMG's new and it's a massive rules change which completely changes the rules as they are written in the 2.0 core set. But since you have those quick builds, there still remains a solution to play to do that kitchen table play. And so I think that I think that's telling for like a successful edition when somebody buys it years later, even if they lose their app support or whatever, that they can still play the game.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is. I don't know. If I was working on another minis game, it would be a really interesting discussion about whether points should be on cards or not. And I think for most games, I would err on the side of yes, actually points on cards. Because again, like if the game is only going to update occasionally and you're not expecting the need for it to be super tightly balanced, or each game component is not worth very much. Like, if you have a game where like you're outfitting, like infantry troops and like nobody costs more than 2 points and nobody's equipment costs more than 2 points and you're spending 500 points, it's sort of like, what's the worst that can happen? I increase something by 1, but like, you're not going to see the same, huge swings in value of like, oh, this ship went up 20 points,
Did you feel more, I guess, especially with 2.0, did you feel like you had more pressure to update points like every 6 months you wanted to do those initially, but then like COVID hit and it's like, well, we're not really getting in-person events, so we have to kind of rely on like digital play. But like did you feel like, was there a time where you didn't really think, hey, I don't want to actually update any points, but we've got to do something, so let's get this new points update out there?
We only ever did points updates when we felt they were worthwhile, but there were always things that we felt were worthwhile based on playtesting feedback.
Sorry, that's a pretty good answer.
But but again, like a lot of that was specific to the way X-Wing existed at the time too, right? So things vary, but yeah, no, all in all, I don't think there were certainly never times when our X-Wing's core of very dedicated, very skilled playtesters weren't agitating for some kind of change. So there was always
playtesters will be. Yeah, I have playtested plenty of things in the past, and I know there's always. I remember barking up Luke Eddy's leg so many times, like, dude, we need nunchucks in this game. Where are they at? And it never happened. But so let me talk about points, and this applies to both games as well. And maybe I'll start with you, Michael, because do you have like when you're designing a ship, is there like a starting point, like a concrete point method? Like, okay, so if this ship has 8 hull, it starts out at 80 points minimum, and then we just add from there, or is it a lot more like, is there a lot more ebb and flow to how you point cost a ship?
My process has always been like start with what I think it should do thematically, and then and I try to bear in mind what impacts that's going to have on the like landscape, the costing landscape, and where I might want it to fit. that's how I would approach stuff like that. I did work on a game once, earlier in my career, where we actually had like we were really like we were really hawkish about trying to like cost, like what does a stat cost, and we had like a real algorithm um, for like what every stat was going to cost, and it was a very interesting experience. That was like when I was doing like Warhammer Disc Wars, which is a
Okay.
very obscure game.
Yeah.
So anyway, maybe hopefully that answers your question a little bit. Like a good example of profundity.
Okay.
Profundity was definitely a case where I was like, okay, this is a brand new Mon Calamari Star Cruiser. We've already got two. They've got their identities. What should this one do? What does it look like the capabilities should be, from like the architecture of the hull, and like what its armament is supposed to be, and what do I think it should do in the game that's going to be novel, right?
Yeah.
And I was also like paying attention to like, okay, where this is probably going to be a heavyweight ship, so I know it's going to cost somewhere in that this certain ballpark.
And speaking of the MC-75 Profundity, or the other versions of the MC-75, now you mentioned you got an early look at that before Rogue One had come out. So was there overlap in the design process? Like, how much of it did you have done, and then you saw the movies like, oh, we need to have a way for it to do this because it does this in the movie. Like, and I know that there was like a title for, in that case, there was the Profundity title, which gives it the ability to launch another ship out. Like, so was that like a later addition?
Oh boy.
I'm going way back there with the questions.
So you're reaching way back here.
No, I think in that case, yeah. I think in that specific case, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember watching the movie and being like, "Oh, okay, there's this and this,"
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I think a lot of those decisions, we were already aware of some of those things, and it was like, okay, we know we wanted to do these things.
Right.
The movie just kind of cemented like, oh, we got to do that.
Because I think there's times where Lucasfilm can be like, hey, here's a scenario, here's something about this ship that you should know. Was there, Max, I got a question for you too also regarding this, and I know we were also talking about points, but like I don't know if you had anything to do with like for Solo, like the Falcon for the Lando's Falcon version of that.
Yeah, I worked on that product.
Because I remember that came out it didn't feel like it was the full 2 years afterwards. So was that like was there some like some early indications of what to expect with that from Lucasfilm? Or?
Gosh, I'm trying to remember. I think that was around the time we had decided that trying to sync things up with films was just, like we could start working on things before the film, but we needed to build ourselves enough time to be able to pivot if necessary.
Yeah.
Because we'd had some trouble with some previous instances of like ship designs changing. I mean, if you look at the first edition versus second edition TIE Silencer, you'll see that they're pretty different.
Yeah. And then the Force Awakens core set, like where Poe was only a pilot skill 8, and you were like, oh wait, hold on, he should be a little higher.
I mean, that's a little tricky. Yeah, that's why we renamed it to Initiative in second edition, because we were like, it shouldn't be pilot skill, because like this means that everybody who's really good has to be the highest
They're low
one.
skill. Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's like, because we were like, okay, we don't want Hera to have to be a 6, but like she's definitely a better pilot than almost anyone else who isn't a Force user named Anakin, a Force user named Skywalker specifically.
Well, she's not anymore. I got news for you. In the AMG's new rule set, she's banned. So you can't run Hera. You can fly anybody else in the Ghost except for Hera. Hera is not allowed to fly the Ghost anymore. So
well, she's got another ship appearance.
Oh yeah,
right?
you can fly her in other ships, but not
there
in the
you
Ghost.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's more fun anyway. I feel like, she
is great in just about anything she flies. I'll give you that.
We saw that first season of Rebels, and obviously she was in the Ghost, but like her best stuff is in other ships. So
she was really good in an X-wing, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Very good in an X-wing. So
I don't think we ever got to do a card for that. So fans, you have your work cut out for you. Maybe we did.
There are a lot of fan projects out there that are really exciting. I have one more question that was about a little bit about like kind of design decisions that you guys have made. Like, have there ever been any like really stand out, like something that you were either super proud of, like that make like this was one of my favorite things that I worked on and it came out better than I expected, or kind of curveballs where something maybe went either much worse than you expected or in a completely different, like, I think the community's going to want to take this ship and fly it straight at the enemy. And they're like, nope, that's a lifeboat flying the opposite way. So yeah, any kind of unexpected or super proud moments for like certain, whether it's an upgrade or a ship or something that you were designing. It could even be not related to Star Wars if it goes that far back.
This is actually this is kind of general. Mm-hmm. But since we've been talking about profundity and Rogue One, like that movie, I really loved that movie in particular. We went to see that as a group. And I vividly remember, I think I was sitting next to Alex. We watched that movie and we got to the Battle of Scarif and we were both just like, oh my God, we were so like full of glee because it was like, oh, this feels like, it feels like the game, and we really just were like, I guess it was just one of those moments where you're like, the thing you made, the thing you're working on kind of feels like it intersected with like what's on screen. And you just felt like like we captured something,
It's a moment of profound satisfaction, right?
Yeah. It's not like so much a balance thing, but I think there was the fact that the game, it felt like that battle felt like an Armada battle in scale and like what you would take. And, like,
it wasn't the Battle of Endor where it's like it would have been a 10,000 point battle. It was like this was a battle group rather than a full Armada, and that's kind of what you get, right?
Exactly. And I think that was because Endor's like a gigantic conflict, right? And
that's
like
the game you only play at a big convention when you got like 30 people.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And I've seen people do that.
I've really done that with X-Wing, as a matter of fact. It's one of my first battle reports. We had like 6 people, brought their entire collection. We lined up like 8 tables and went crazy. But you can't do that for like just for normal play, and that's a good point. What about you, Max? Do you have any
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a long list. I'll go with the recent thing. It took a lot of work and there was a lot of like tweaking it back and forth, but I really liked how The Mandalorian and The Child came out as as options, and so it's fun to see those out in the world and see that ship that Gavin put a lot of time into making sure that thing looked really perfect.
I still haven't gotten mine yet, by the way. Shipping problems or delays.
I was gonna say, hey, that's way out of my hands.
It's not your fault. No, that's. I think a large part of that is just the way the world is right now, and we have to just get used to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all need to. I mean, just in the board game industry in general, right? And looking at what's happened with stuff. Everything is delayed, and for good reason. And I think it's going to be sort of building a new logistics chain out to some extent.
Sure.
So I think, this is, for the moment, I think things being a little slower is the new normal. But you know what? There were like 3,000 new board games in 2019 or whatever. So things coming out a little slower. Maybe we'll actually all have time to play more of those.
We can catch up a little bit. Yeah. I think both games have so much, all of it, even Legion too. There's so much content where this is a good time for things to slow down. It would have been much more. You look at a game like Destiny that had product slowdowns before it was even while it was in its infancy, and that really hurt. But like if you're gonna have a slowdown, many years into a game's development, when you've got dozens and dozens of expansions in your collection, you have a lot of stuff to play. You've got lists you haven't built yet. You've got things you've got combinations you haven't flown yet. This is a great time to enjoy the slowdown, I think. So speaking of other board games too, I've been meaning to ask you guys, do you guys have any favorite board games? They don't have to be ones that you've worked on, by the way.
Oh well, I think for board games, all of my favorites are ones I haven't worked on. Since Stone Saga's not out yet, so I can't speak to that. Although we'll see how much I enjoy playing that. Sometimes it's hard to play my own work in the same way it's hard to read your own.
I can see that.
Fiction writing. But I really enjoy Carcassonne. I find that game really meditative. That was what we always played in college after we'd stay up until like 4 a.m. getting mad at each other playing big multiplayer Magic games. Mm-hmm. And then we'd play Carcassonne as like a cool down game. And I still just like that as like a nice icebreaker conversation game. In terms of other stuff, I recently played Wingspan.
Oh, that's a great
and
game too. Yeah,
super enjoyed it. A lot of fun.
it's beautiful too. It's like
Oh yeah,
it's calming. There's how some games can have that, like, oh, these are nice components, and it's like it's not like a super aggressive like kill the opponent, and it's just like, oh, okay, I'm just
yeah.
gonna
You're getting birds. The birds
yeah.
laying eggs.
Yeah, very cute. Great theme on that game as well. Yeah. What about you, Michael?
Well, I think like I said, the classic for me that I spent the most time in my life playing was probably Twilight Imperium.
Yes.
Um, and but like that's the kind of experience you just can't replicate when you get, I don't have the hours and hours that I had at that time to pour into that, and
Mm.
like my friends, the group of friends that I could have over and we could play.
Yeah.
Um, these days, like I'm definitely the kind of person that's like I can never name just one favorite, but I think these days I really like the Coin series
Which ones?
um, by GMT.
Oh, okay.
Um, it's it's a series. It's about historical conflicts,
Oh, yeah.
and it has a very interesting like card system, priority system for like how you and a lot of those cards are like they have to do with like actual historical events. Like one of those games, the one I played a lot was a game called Fire in the Lake, which is about Vietnam War.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I really came to like that series, and I had a group of friends at Fantasy Flight that I would play those with.
Very cool.
Another really good one we played recently. Well, I guess a couple months ago now, but somewhat recently. It was that one we played with Brooks, Churchill.
Yes.
Um, that was a lot of fun. Asymmetrical diplomacy game with this sort of sideboard element of the war in Europe.
Hmm.
Really entertaining system for like managing diplomatic crisis, which I feel like a lot of games don't model mechanically. They just sort of take the diplomacy route of, or the TI route of like. I guess TI has some mechanics for diplomacy, but like there's also a lot of just like table talk, right? That's the idea. You're supposed to table talk, but this one is very much like it's all mechanized. So it's like instead of the war being this like complicated thing, it's the like negotiations. I really liked that.
That's
Yeah,
great.
the summits,
Yeah,
the conferences. It
yeah,
models the way that the conferences that the Allies had held throughout the war, that they were actually they were gaming each other
Mm.
to try to get the best deal that they could for their interests, or as they perceived them.
That's a great. I really do enjoy games that have a lot of table talk. That's one of the reasons I like TI4 so much. Is there is a lot of table
Yeah.
talk. There you have that whole, the whole politics aspect of the game. And I guess I get my closing
I
question.
still got to play that game.
Oh yeah, fourth edition, especially with the expansion too. The expansion
Yeah.
opens up a lot more, but it's and it's a little faster because you only do politics once somebody takes Mechatol Rex. So the first like 2 turns are a lot quicker, and then that's when it starts to slow down.
I
Do you,
was also just really excited with the way that edition they really expanded and add on new things to the TI universe.
oh yeah,
like giant
That was
robots. They put in giant robots. That was the
there
yeah.
are
important thing
giant
for
robots, and they are super fun. They there are yeah. My last game, I held Mechatol Rex with like 4 mechs on it the whole time. Nobody was
Nice.
coming down. Nobody was coming down. Still lost though, but that's okay. That's okay.
Oh,
If you
sounds
could
big.
if you could design another game for any IP, whether it be a like a licensed game, like you're gonna go back to you get to pick the IP, they're gonna hire you, you're gonna start designing a game. What would be one of your top choices? You can even name 2 if it's a toss up.
I got 2.
Okay.
The Expanse
Oh, good one.
for me, definitely. I loved that series. And I think, I mean, having done a space game, it's like that would be another very different, interesting space combat.
Yes.
I also really love fantasy. I would have my dream game for a while would have been working to do like a minis game for Game of Thrones.
Okay.
But like I think I have to say like I played a little bit of the CMON version, and I
Song
really
of Ice
admire
and
what they
Fire?
did.
Yeah.
Yeah, Song of Ice and Fire is
Yeah.
really what I mean. Like I really admire what they did. I think the sculpts are great. I think that game's really interesting.
It's got a lot of. I haven't had the chance to play it yet, but it's got a lot of things going for it. And I feel like they kind of they were obviously weren't copying Rune Wars or whatever, but the fact that it was announced in close proximity, it made me think like, boy, there's a lot of Trays games coming out right now, and certainly there have been Trays games before, and there's still new Trays games coming out, but yeah, I think that's definitely a market that a lot of people seem to kind of latch onto, is the Trays. Kind of gives you that rank and file system. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was when the big Tray game from GW ended, right? That was the boom.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed Rune Wars. I didn't like the machining of the trays though, because when you lost one whole section, you had to pull out that tray. Like there were so many times where I would pop my dudes out, and I'd have to like refit. Oh wait, where was it? But still, man, like it was a fun game, and the minis were great too, and the engine, like the double dials for the commands that you were doing with it, that was super cool too. It needs to come back. If that's a game that needs a second edition, like it needs to just come back.
It was a fun game to work on. One of the things I enjoyed a lot was, like adding onto the IP. It's a different thing. I think when you're doing an adventure game, it's a little different than when you're doing a war game, because you have to talk more about the politics and the factions and stuff, and that's something I find really interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a fun game to work on.
And you had mounted commanders, which is also super cool. And I hope Legion gets that someday. You got Han Solo could be riding a Tauntaun, or you could have him get off. And like Rune Wars it was ahead of its time. It had a lot of things going for it. What about you, Max? Dream IP?
Definitely Gundam.
Oh,
final answer. Definitely that. That's I remember I went on. I think it was Justin Bolger. Was that the podcast I went on? No, it was somebody else's podcast, but they were like Star Wars or Star Trek. And I was like, Gundam, steadfastly.
Oh my goodness. See, I was going to advocate for Star Trek, being a big fan of all of the games, but my favorite of all of the Fantasy Flight games has always been Armada. And I always played that from the very beginning. I thought, like, I really feel like this game was made for Star Trek a little bit more than Star Wars. Because I just that shield system, the arcs and stuff, it fits into the things you see described more in Star Trek battles, and except for the squadrons, because Star Trek doesn't really do the squadrons play as much. But that's my answer. I'm not supposed to answer my own questions, but I'm throwing it out there too. I still want to see an Armada style Star Trek game. Maybe WizKids has Alex Davies over at WizKids now, so maybe we'll see something. One of these days. Alex, if you're watching, I need a Star Trek game, a new one, not Attack Wing. I want a new one. But, we'll see.
I'd be personally interested to see the version of that you would make, Crabbok.
Oh, so. Yeah, that would be fascinating.
I have a whole PowerPoint slide presentation, but we don't have enough time for that. I could give you an elevator pitch on it right now, and I've literally here's the 2-second version. In addition to Armada stuff, I also have shields on the top and bottom. And there's a little hinge on the base. This is going to increase production costs, but there's a hinge on the base. So part of your maneuver, you can turn like slightly left or slightly right. It's like a 45-degree turn. And when I turn that way, my left or my right now becomes my top, and my left now becomes my bottom. So that's another way to alternate shields. Like he's hitting.
I love it.
Yeah, there you go.
I love it. I love it. 3-dimensional maneuver.
That's how you get 3D maneuvers in space. And if you bump somebody, you're now directly above them. Right.
All right. So it's a thought here. What if we put magnets all over everything, and then we magnetize the table? Oh. And then we ran a current through it.
That could work.
And then we could just have stuff hover.
Like a maglev train.
And you put a little camera on there, and you can control it with your smartphone.
Yeah. Or drones.
Just drones. Drones with lasers. Yeah. That's gonna do it. Now, but that could be more Gundam though,
3D, yeah. Well, Gundam is really interesting too, because like a Gundam game would be kind of like an Expanse game, because Gundam cares a lot about things like gravity and mass and movement in space, and there aren't really energy shields or things like that in most Gundam series. But the weird thing about Gundam is, because of the whole Minovsky particles thing, everything is limited to like line of sight. So on the one hand, you've got these ships that can like just fly around at any angle, and you don't have this sort of Star Wars space dogfighting dynamic. But on the other hand, you also don't have the expanses set up of firing missile barrages at each other that are going to kill you in 10 minutes, but you don't know it yet, because everything has to happen in this sort of like really close in knife fight. Because you can't do any targeting beyond close range. So from a game perspective, Gundam would be awesome because you get to do a lot of cool stuff with it. Anyway, I don't know if anyone from Bandai is watching.
Well, giant robots, or imagine it was opened up a little bit wider, and then you had like crossovers like with Voltron and Transformers.
That would be fun.
And
that would be fun.
Just have all the giant robots. That would be awesome. All right, well, I think
Super Robot Wars, the game. That would be a lot of fun.
That would be really fun. So maybe somebody's watching, because I would love to see what you guys come up with for all of these great IPs, especially the Expanse. I mean, the books too. I mean, the show is great, but man, the books.
My
really good.
My wife really liked the books. She was actually got me into the show.
Okay.
I have not read the novels, but the show just became.
It's pretty faithful. I mean, there's a few changes made for reasonable reasons, and to some certain characters are consolidated into one or something like that. Just so you don't have to 20,000 actors or so, but really good stuff. I definitely suggest reading at least the final 3 books, because they're pretty awesome too. But with all that being said, I don't want to keep you guys too much longer, so I want to start to wrap things up. Again, I want to thank you, Michael and Max, for coming out, for spending your time with me tonight. And I'm sure that people are looking for where they can find your work. I guess I'm gonna get links from you guys, and we'll put them down in the description.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll drop my blog down there. Stone Saga, the cooperative survival crafting game, completely different genre, board game even, that Luke and I are working on.
Love it. I am thrilled. But thank you guys so much, and I guess there's no other great way to wrap things up than to just say
Yep.
I think we're having.
I was actually going to say, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my own project.
Oh yes, please do. Tell us.
Which is I've been spending a lot of my time on. I've been working with Chip Theory Games the last year, and we recently announced Elder Scrolls: Betrayal of the Second Age, which is a new experience for me. I'm working on a board game and with a great group of people.
Awesome, that's fantastic.
I think I just sent the link there. Hopefully you can see that.
I'll get it, and it'll be in the video description below. So I want you guys to check out these links. That's a great way to show your support to Michael and Max for coming on board and sharing some awesome stories and some insight into the ship making process with us. Thank you both for hanging out with me today. I want to thank you guys at home for watching as well. You guys are absolutely amazing and help make this channel possible. Make sure you like and subscribe, and leave a comment. Big thanks to my patrons as well. You guys are amazing and help make the channel possible. Thank you for your continued support. Always remember, may the force be with you. Live long and prosper, and don't ever have to pick one IP over another. You like what you like.